Hi there, micro folks. This is Mr. Hooker, and this is chapter 10, Externalities. Let's get to it. So, externalities are basically a benefit or cost of a market activity borne by a third party. So, if it is an external cost, it is a negative externality. If it is an external benefit, it is a positive externality. Your most common negative externality. Your most common negative externality is pollution, um, which would be an external cost. So it's an uncompensated cost that an individual or firm imposes on others. Um, and as they say here, air and water pollution. Texting while driving is another one. I heard a statistic on the radio this morning. Every time you text while driving, you're looking away for an average of 4.6 seconds. So you're looking away from the road for an average of 4.6 seconds. Um, and so any chemical runoff that affects fish stocks, so that's also water pollution. Um, so it's kind of crazy um, the way those go. External benefits or benefits that individual firms confer on others without receiving compensation. Um, some examples of those positive externalities or external benefits: beehives next to almond orchards or any orchards. Um, there's been things written up about the beehives next to the apple orchards up at Washington State and the symbiotic relationships between the beekeepers and the apple growers. Education, so you're participating in higher education, which is one of the largest positive externalities. And honestly, for that, it's not really even about the education. To an extent, it's about your taxes. So, the explanation on that one is that those people who graduate from college typically get higher paying jobs. Higher paying jobs mean that you will earn more and pay more in taxes. Paying more in taxes means that the government, is able to provide more services to people, and that means that those people, whether they are high earners or not, um, basically receive more. So everybody benefits from people who receive a higher education. Also, preserved farmland, so set aside farmland. Um, so external costs and benefits known as externalities. Cost are the negative externalities, benefits are the positive externalities. The externalities are the impacts on the third party of the transaction between others. So, fracking, if it pollutes the drinking water, is a negative externality. Um, so, driving while distracted. So, 1 in 4 accidents are caused by cell phone use. Drivers 23 times more likely to have an accident while texting. In 2022, there were more than 3,000 deaths were attributed to distracted driving. And the risk posed by distracted driving isn't just the risk to the driver, it's a safety risk to others. So about 7 years ago, um, one June, it was either June or July night, I was still living in North Carolina, a small town called Mount Airy. It's Mayberry. It was Andy Griffith's hometown. It's the town Mayberry was um, based on, if you've ever seen the Andy Griffith show. So my wife and I were coming home from Winston-Salem, coming through a stoplight near our house, and this lady from Virginia runs the stoplight at about 55 miles an hour in a 35 zone and tees us up. Crazy thing is, she had her kid in the back seat, not strapped in the safety thing. So the kid comes through the front window, comes across our car, and so the kid was all right. I mean, they lived, but I don't know how bad they were hurt they lived, and they had to cut me out the car. I was messed up, but then my wife was okay. The lady was fine. So the ones that they got it the worst were me and the kid. So it's just crazy how that whole texting while driving thing was just nuts that night. So people be crazy. I just it bothers me a little bit with that. Cost and benefits of pollution. Marginal social cost of pollution is the additional cost imposed on society as a whole by an additional unit of pollution. So acid rain, smog, contaminated water, etc. Marginal social benefit is the additional gain to society as a whole from an additional unit of pollution. Reducing pollution has that opportunity cost. It requires resources that could have been used to produce other goods and services. So the marginal social benefit pollution is the goods and services that could have been had by society if it tolerated more pollution. So basically, the goal is not zero pollution. It is just a reduction in pollution to a tolerable level. And we'll get to that a little bit later. So the socially optimal quantity of pollution is the quantity society would choose if all costs and benefits were accounted for. Um, so would a market economy, if left to itself, arrive at the socially optimal quantity? And the answer is nah, we ain't doing that. So let's look at it this way. Marginal social cost is going to be upward sloping, marginal social benefits, a downward sloping curve. So marginal social benefits always going to look like a demand curve. Marginal social cost is going to look like a supply curve. And so you can see where they intersect. It's not zero, but it is a number. So in this piece here, you got a social optimal quantity, and we've got a price of $200 a unit. So that's basically where we are with that. So that's the optimal tax that we should have. Um, so what we call that is a Pigovian tax. And so um, we should have, and Pigovian tax basically is just a tax that is exactly the amount necessary to get us to the point that we need to be at. It's not less than, not more than, but exactly the amount we need to be at. And so that is the goal of a Pigovian tax. So if we were to have a Pigovian tax, all it's going to do is hit us at the optimal level, which in this case would be $200. Um, so the marginal social cost, if up there at 400, um, so that one would be inefficient at that point. All right. Why do we produce too much pollution? In a market economy without government intervention, polluters are the only ones who decide how much to pollute. So they consider all the private benefits of pollution rather than the social. So they don't know the social. All they know is, look, let's think about like steel, right? We've got Pittsburgh, the Steel City, and the pollution that they put out. So that one is insane if you think about it over time. But all they know is this is the price of steel. This is my cost to produce steel. These are the people who want steel, and this is my supply. Nowhere in there do they think about the pollution that they are putting out in Pittsburgh. That doesn't come into that doesn't come into the equation. The question is, what is the current price of steel in the market? How many people are demanding Pittsburgh steel and or in that case US steel because that was the main producer there. But and then like what is our cost to produce it? And so that way they would just, that's how they would look at it and that's what they would produce. It was so badly polluted in Pittsburgh, they would power wash the buildings every year, and they still do. They power wash the municipal buildings, and people thought they were gray granite. And once the steel industry pretty much died, they continued doing it and found out that the buildings were white granite. But the pollution was so bad, they never got them to white. They only got them to gray, even with the power washing every year. Um, so they don't produce the socially optimal quantity. They produce the market quantity. And so at the market quantity, the marginal social benefit of an additional unit of pollution is zero, um, while the marginal social cost of an additional unit is so much higher. So, can the private sector solve the problem of externalities without government intervention? The answer is yes. So, it would be the Coase theorem that you would do. So, the economy can reach the efficient solution with externalities if the cost of making the deal are sufficiently low. So, you need basically three things to happen for the Coase theorem to work. One, low transaction cost. Two, few participants. And three, well-defined property rights. If you can have those three things, you can do the Coase theorem. Okay? So if a family agrees to stop playing loud music during the next door neighbor's child's nap time in exchange for use of the lawnmower, then the Coase theorem has done its job. So, you know, if individuals take externalities into account, they internalize the externality. And so that way the outcome's efficient without government intervention. You just have to have a couple of people involved. They have to come to an agreement. You have to know who has property rights. You have to understand that like the costs can't get too high. So why don't people always do this? And the problem is the transaction cost. So, like I said, you have to have low transaction costs. The cost of making that deal, they often prevent that mutually beneficial trade. Um, so, when the people who are hurt by the externality are widely dispersed, the cost of communication and negotiation is simply too high. And so, like greenhouse gases, transaction costs prevent the private sector from dealing with the externalities. So, the government has to deal with that. So, like I said here, um, just a minute ago, the three things necessary for the Coase theorem: low transaction cost, few participants, well-defined and enforceable property rights. Um, oops, too far. So if the market doesn't solve its externality problem, then what happens? So the three types of government policies used to deal with the pollution are environmental standards, emission taxes, and tradable emission permits, which that upsets some environmentalists, but hey, can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs. Um, Environmental standards, rules that protect the environment by specifying actions by producers and consumers. So we're going to tell you exactly what you have to do. So in the US, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, is the principal enforcer of environmental policies at the national level. They're the ones that are going to tell you like exactly what you got to do. They set the standards. So, um, they tell you what the standard is, you have to follow. Number two is the tax. This is those Pigouvian taxes we were talking about before. Um, Cost depends on the amount of pollution a firm produces. The Pigouvian taxes are the taxes designed to reduce the external cost, exactly the amount necessary to get us to the optimal amount. You can have other types of emission taxes that may be a little bit more or a little bit less. They would not be Pigouvian taxes. So if it's Pigouvian tax, it's designed to reduce it to the optimal amount. That's what makes it a Pigouvian tax. All right. And then tradable emission permits, licenses to emit limited quantities of pollutants. They can be bought and sold by polluters. The largest emission permit trading system is the European Union system for controlling emissions of carbon dioxide. This one we use, it's called, we do cap and trade. So we cap it by a certain amount and then we allocate permits. And if you don't have enough permits, you have to buy permits on the open market. We're going to stop right there and I will see you in video number 2.